And I want to thank Sinn Féin, and in particular Deputy Circuit Clerk, in relation to this motion, which I have no difficulty in supporting. And it's disappointing that the Government has brought an amending motion. I would have thought sense would have prevailed, and that we would make language mean something, in that we heard what the women told us, the women of honour who I met last week, and thank you to Deputy Peadar Tobin for organising that. We heard them, we believed them, and then we proceed to ignore them. And that's literally what we're doing here. So in the first instance, I just want to deal with something Deputy Berry said, and I know he's still here, and he talked about the progress that was made, I think, in the noughties in relation to a decline. Now, I have to take issue with him in relation to that, unless he can show me the evidence of that, because what I'd like to know is what analysis on the number of men and women who left the Defence Forces in that time due to sexual harassment or assault, or a pervading culture of fear or reprisals. It's a legitimate question to ask. What analysis has been done in relation to the downgrading of accusations of serious sexual assault, the downgrading to minor breaches of discipline under a particular section of the Defence Act? How many people or persons have had such minor charges laid against them after being accused of serious assault and then being transferred or relocated? Now, these are essential questions if we're to take on face value what Deputy Berry has said, and I'm not personalising to Deputy Berry, it's just that he highlighted this. And so when we say factually, and he's correct, that there's been a decline, what he's saying really, if he looks at the facts, is that there's been a decline in the number of investigations. And so in the 1980s we had 54, in the 1990s we had 35, in 2000s we had 20, and in 2010 we had 17. So yes, the number of investigations have gone down, but obviously we have to ask, why have they gone down? Have the women been afraid of reprisals, or the men indeed? What are the reasons? What analysis has been done before we can come to that conclusion, which is a dangerous conclusion to come to in light of the ongoing reports of further and further allegations against women? So I take issue with that completely. And I also would like the Minister perhaps to clarify some of those figures, I think, come from an independent article, Sunday Independent or Irish Independent, towards the end of the year, based on a report that was given to the Department, to the Minister. Are any of the Ministers of State here aware of that? Have they it to hand? Could you enlighten me if that's where all of these figures have been set out, and what conclusions were drawn from them? Were they the conclusions that Deputy Berry is entitled to draw, or are there other conclusions that should be drawn from them if we're going to learn? In relation to this, I have the greatest respect for the judge, an independent female judge, lots of experience, and has shown her mettle. If she can rise above the pathetic terms of reference, then fair play to her. If she can produce a report within the time allowed, which seems to change depending on which minister is talking, a draft one at 6 months, something else at 9 months, something else at 12 months, and if that can be done within the terms of reference, I'll take my hat off, and I will be the first to apologise here. So we have the overall aims of the independent review, which I've quoted before and I won't quote again, 3 of them. And then we have specific terms of reference, up to 13 terms of reference, and absolutely no powers whatsoever to compel anyone to seek any documentation. So should the men and women decide not to participate, and I come back to the women of honour, but those that should be going forward, the others, and if they decide not to, that's it. Goodbye, nothing that can be done about that. And then number 13, the term of reference number 13, finally refers to historical. It comes at the bottom, 13. To advise whether further work is required to examine the issues of an historical nature and to make any recommendations regarding how this might be pursued. Now, of course, that's number 13, and perhaps the ministers will tell me that they're not ranked. But it's interesting that it's coming last, number 1. It's interesting that the time is a movable feast. And what is most significant and beyond interesting is the women who had the courage to come forward are not going to participate, which makes the whole inquiry very difficult, might be an understatement, difficult. And so if they're not going to participate, and they are responsible for highlighting all of this. It begs the question, of course, how can it work, number one? And number two, the very terms of reference, ministers, if you look at them, you'd have to say they're going to examine the policies and the practices and the procedures on the ground to see if they align with dignity. Well, we know well they don't align with dignity, because we've had a whole series of allegations of sexual harassment, sexual assault, down to rape. And now we're going to look at the policies. We're not going to look at what the women and the men have told us, what happened to them. We believe them. And the three monkeys come to mind. See, hear, and hear no evil, see no evil, do no evil. Is that the three? Speak no evil, Garmagat, speak no evil, but actually do the evil. See, hear, and speak, but do it, and have no accountability. Now, forgive me of my cynicism, because before I speak, I usually try, and my office as well, try to look, study, and examine the necessary documentation. And I've done that. And so when I look back to see, is my cynicism justified? Are my questions justified? And I look back, and we look at Tom Clonan, going back to 2000. And we see what happened to that man, don't we? His research was discredited. And then when he stuck to his guns and the discrediting programme didn't work, then we set up a review, which I'll come back to, and we set up that review. And subsequently, Tom Clonan, I understand, said he understood and believed that the changes had occurred in good faith, and then he realised he had been duped. Maybe is too strong a word. Maybe his belief that systems could change wasn't based on reality, because my experience in a number of different roles is institutions do not change. If institutions changed, then we wouldn't have needed Katie Hannon's documentary on RTE or the women's courage in coming forward, because that is what has led to this. And then to add insult to that, we do not allow them to take part in the terms of reference. Although in your speech, you talk about having met them on a number of occasions, which was very nice, or the Taoiseach and the Minister. But the important thing was to have them engage in the terms of reference, which didn't happen. And so let's look back. We have Tom Clonan's research, and it's been quoted what he pointed out, a number of his findings in relation to the situation at the time. Women in combat, the status and roles assigned female personnel, anonymised interviews with 60 female officers, 59 of whom suffered abuse or discrimination, 12 of whom said they had been sexually assaulted or raped, bullying and sexual harassment, including rape, and so on. In 2019, Tom Clonan said he believed, 2019, after 2000, that he believed the Defence Forces had taken on board. Clearly they hadn't, because following his research in 2002, an independent a review was set up. One woman on it, one external, all the rest five people, one of them a woman, 2002, to review existing policies and procedures. 20 years ago, we were reviewing existing policies and procedures, and now we're going to set up another independent review to review it. And following on from that, we had a monitoring committee, which was excellent, although the Minister for Defence seems to misunderstand what a monitoring committee does. They produced 3 reports. They made, on the last occasion in 2014, 3 specific recommendations, and no minister here today has referred to that. And you know what Minister Coveney told us? They didn't do their job, or words to that effect. They weren't, because the culture hadn't changed. But the culture hadn't changed because the ministers over the years hadn't done their job, the army management hadn't done, and the only one that had done their job was the monitoring committee that highlighted what still needed to be done. And what do? We abolish it. And we abolish it, and we don't re-establish it, notwithstanding that Mark Mellett wrote to the Minister of Defence at the time, Paul Keogh, in January 19, and he asked for it to be re-established. And at that point, they were investigating 15 cases of alleged misconduct by personnel in 2019, and so on. Now, I'm coming near the end of my time, so when I stand here, it's on the basis of having done research. It's on the basis of having thought about this subject, and out of respect to the women of honour who have come forward in a most public way to tell of the most horrific abuse. and we get a review of policies and procedures to see if they align. How more insulting can it get? I can't imagine how more insulting it can get, Minister. I really can't. At the very least, I would have expected a detailed speech on the actions to date from the various reports, why the Independent Monitoring Committee wasn't renewed, why the recommendations weren't acted on at the very least. I'm over time, so I'll stop in mid-sentence.
Thank you.